You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we challenge the status quo of the food industry, celebrate good food founders who are building businesses on their own terms, introduce industry disruptors, and are redefining equitability. If you're ready to build your financial confidence and join the good food revolution to change the way the food industry does business, you are in the right place. I'm the Good Food CFO and your host, Sarah Delavan. Hey, Chels. Today on the podcast, we're diving into our next book club selection. But before we do that, I thought it could be fun to talk about some upcoming movies that put the food industry at the center of the story.
Yeah, you shared a Civil Eats newsletter with me that had this article called "The Food System is Having a Big Screen Moment." That sounds really fun.
Yeah, that article takes a look at the new documentaries on food and agriculture that are covering different topics, but they all point to ways in which food production is failing or harming Americans. And maybe more importantly, they're pondering and presenting potential solutions to those problems that impact all of us. So the first movie I want to talk about is called The Smell of Money. And this movie is actually available on a number of streaming networks right now, and we'll include that information and all of those details in our show notes. So this film focuses on the day-to-day struggles of a group of Black families who are engaged in a lawsuit with Smithfield. I think we've talked about them before here on the podcast. They are one of the biggest industrial pork companies in the world. And this lawsuit surrounds the pollution of the communities surrounding Smithfield farms and the ways that these industrial farms have devastated the health, the property values, and the quality of life of the people in the area. And there's this really poignant moment in the article that really got me interested in watching this. And it talks about how the writer producer of the film, their name is Jamie Berger, is talking to a young boy from one of the families that's being followed in their front yard. And she asks him what he thinks the name of the movie should be. And he replies that he thinks it should be called The Hog Farm Stinks. And I don't know for any of our listeners who've ever traveled along the 5 here in California. So if I'm going from LA to San Francisco, for example, and I'm on the 5, you drive by CAFO, like beef cattle farms, and the stink it smells like ammonia. Like I remember when like back in the 80s and early 90s, my mom would get a perm. And when you're driving past these farms and even approaching them, like they're not even in sight yet. And it's just this overwhelming, like massive, intoxicating, like perm smell.
Yeah. When I drove out here to Indiana, when I moved here last summer, I drove through parts of the country I'd never driven through before, and there were a lot of cattle farms along the way. And I just remember being struck by like the oppressiveness of the smell. Like it just permeated. It felt like a thick, like I couldn't get out of it.
Yeah.
Until I was well, past the farm. It was awful. And I can't imagine living near one.
Yeah. What just kind of popped into my mind is like, I think a lot of the films and education and information around industrial farming and, big kind of in commercial CAFO style farming has been animal welfare and worker welfare, which is really, really important. But I think there hasn't been a ton of information around what it's like to live around there.
Yeah.
Like, and then the idea of, raising children in an area that's nearby, some of these really large farms. I think I'm excited to learn more and to see what the realities of that are. So I'm really interested in watching this movie. I'm super excited that it's available now.
Yeah, same. Another film on this list is Food Inc. 2.
Oh.
And Food Inc. 2. So this is in select screenings right now across the country, but they have more info on their website about where else it might become available. And like you said, we're going to include all that in the show notes. But this is a sequel, right, to the first Food Inc. film, which was groundbreaking.
Yeah.
It examined how increasingly powerful food and agriculture businesses we're hurting, as you just talked about, right? Workers, animals, the environment, and really eaters
Mm-hmm.
in the name of larger profits. And this follow-up, this sequel, includes voices like Michael Pollan, which you and I both love. Anything that he does, we want to
Yeah.
read it, watch it, like take it in. And Eric Schlosser and other experts, and they're detailing how even though some of the issues that were raised by the first film are now like more widely talked about, understood, right?
Mm.
The consolidation and the industrialization in the food industry is still growing, and it has continued, right? Pretty steadily since this film was released. Did you say 15 years ago?
Yeah, 15 years ago.
Yeah. But so this sequel, this film, really spends time talking about and examining the exponential growth of ultra processed foods on our shelves. And it's also talking about the increasing urgency of building a more climate friendly and climate resilient food system, which we've talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to really proposing solutions, the film examines policy efforts to break up corporate power. And it also looks at the pros and cons of tech innovations like lab grown and cultured meat.
As you said, Chelsea, I mean, pretty much anything Michael Pollan puts out, he was a life changer for me with Omnivore's Dilemma, and I continue to take in everything that he writes about. And creates.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in their opinions on cultured meats and lab grown meats, and I think too, for anyone watching on YouTube, my eyes kind of widened. I was like holding back thoughts when you talked about the exponential increase of ultra processed foods on our shelves, and thinking
Yeah.
back to a previous, news segment that we did, this idea that really large corporations put out that like ultra processed food is necessary to feed, I'll just say, to feed poor people, to feed people who are in food apartheids. Like, it's insane to me. And the fact that 15 years have passed, and despite awareness of it and, increasing, like, the things just really haven't changed or
Yeah.
improved in so many ways. And so I'll be watching this one too. Like I said, excited to hear what they have to say, and just gets me even more fired up about what we're trying to do here and what the brands that we work with are trying to do in the food industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
The next film that I want to highlight from the Civil Eats article is called Farming While Black. Leah Penniman is the author of the book titled Farming While Black that propelled the conversation around the legacy and future of Black farmers in an unprecedented way. And this film is a visual representation of her journey toward establishing Soul Fire Farm. In addition to following her journey, the film also features Karen Washington, who's an urban farming pioneer from the Bronx, and Blaine Snipstall, I hope I'm pronouncing their name right, who is a co-founder of Maryland's Black Dirt Farm Collective and who coined the term Afroecology. And what Civil Eats goes on to say is that while the film includes critical history on the long subjugation and discrimination of Black people in American agriculture, the camera lens is also focused more toward the future, on how young Black farmers are reclaiming their connections to the land and building food sovereignty in their communities. And this film currently is screening at film festivals, and you can get updates as to where and when it may be streaming in our show notes and then on the website.
Yeah, that one sounds really interesting. I love when you said that it is focusing on the future,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of giving that story of, hope or positivity. I love that.
Yeah. And I did not get a chance to read that book. So I'm really excited to learn about Leah's story and learn about the other folks that are featured in this film. I think it's interesting to talk about these voices of this film and then to talk about the next film on the list, Chelsea.
Yeah. So our last film on this list is probably going to be a bit of a controversial one. This film is called Common Ground, and it is a sequel to a documentary called Kiss the Ground, which was really one of the first big docs to bring awareness to regenerative agriculture. And Kiss the Ground received a lot of praise and attention for telling that story, but it also received criticism that it didn't include the stories of many Black, Indigenous, or people of color who have contributed and continue to contribute to the rise of regenerative agriculture, and also for ignoring the political and systemic conditions that exist that undermine the positive impacts of the movement. This film, this sequel, aims to change that. So it is tackling head on the politics that are behind our broken food system. And it's also presenting the changes that the filmmakers believe need to be made, but through a more diverse set of voices. So this film is currently playing in select theaters across the country, and I'm sure we'll see it move into more theaters over the coming months.
Yeah, well, I'll be interested to see if, the film lives up to that promise, and interested to kind of hear people's thoughts on that as well. But now I want to do a little bit of a pivot away from film to another interesting way that the food industry is meeting art, if you will. So
Yeah.
you may recognize the name Ron Finley. He's the self-proclaimed gangsta gardener who really changed the trajectory of his own life by doing a TED Talk about 10 years ago about food apartheid in his community, which is South Central LA. And I think it said that the talk has been viewed nearly 5 million times in the last 10 years.
Wow.
And one of its most memorable lines is this following quote when he says, "Growing your own food is like printing your own money." And that has become the seed of Finley's burgeoning philanthropic work. Over the last 10 years, he has been invited to speak around the globe, everywhere from around the US to Denmark and Greece. I mean, the list of places that he's been to speak is just phenomenal. And he's doing a really cool thing with his staff this year in 2024. They are curating an art show called Breathe toward climate and social justice at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. So I think it's really interesting to see this focus on the food industry and how food is so connected to climate and social justice, and to see it in film form, in book form, and now in art form as well. I think it gives the opportunity to reach more people in the ways that they learn and that they take information in. So I just think it's really great to see all of these movies and all of these things in existence, and I'm real excited about them.
Yeah, and I think it also points to, right, like the fact that we are seeing so many films around the same topics and these, art installations and things. It shows that people are actually interested
Yeah.
in understanding the impacts of our current food system. And I
Yeah.
think that that's just another like branch or arm of the good food revolution, and showing that it is picking up steam.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's very exciting.
Yeah. And, the part of the good food revolution that we're focused on is that financial piece, right? How business is done. And I think that's a great this kind of segue into the book recommendation that we are making today. It's definitely a financially focused book, I will say. It also delves into ideas of leadership and sort of ways of thinking about leading and running a business. So I'm really excited to share the title officially and to get people, reading along with us, Chelsea. So I think we should dive into the episode. What do you think?
Yeah, let's get to it. Are you looking for support to tackle the financial work of growing or sustaining a profitable food business without hiring a consultant? Or maybe you want a different way to look at your food business financials. Now you can join Sarah Delavan for the weekly CFO office hours inside the Good Food CFO community. Our setting allows you to get FaceTime with Sarah and a small group of your peers. Each week, the group will dive into the work that you're doing, support you when you're feeling stuck, and give you the confidence that you're on the path to profitability. February passes are on sale now. You can get more information by going to thegoodfoodcfo.com and clicking on services.
Hey, Chelsea, we are back today with a brand new title for our book club.
Sarah,
Hmm.
before you tell us the title,
Okay.
I kind of want to go back a little bit and talk about the book club fireside chat that we had for our last book club selection.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, so that one was Stolen Focus by Johan Hari. It was the first book club selection for the Good Food CFO book club. And we had such a good conversation with some founders inside our community at that fireside chat. It was really cool because we were talking with food founders. And so we did talk about like, how do what are the things that get in your way
Hmm.
that maybe steal your focus? But what I thought was even cooler was we really dove into how, as a founder, your workplace can really affect your focus.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're working with a team, I think anybody who's led a team knows that everybody always wants your attention.
Yep.
They always have questions or they want to show you something or get your, advice or approval or guidance. And so it can be really hard to really maintain your own focus on what you're working on when that's happening.
Yeah. And then alternatively, if you are a solopreneur or you have a really small team, you're doing everything, and it can be difficult to stay focused because you've got to pay attention to so many things at one time, or your customer service and sales and manufacturing or whatever it is. And so it's sort of in all ways it can be really hard to stay focused. And I think one of the folks who was there who joined us was talking about how, like, yes, they have a big team and yes, there seems to be always something that needs to be fixed, but they've got a number of people in place now, and they're trying to figure out, how do you focus this sort of new free time that you have? It was a Tuesday at 11 a.m. and they were like, not too long ago I couldn't have been here,
Yeah.
on that call. And I just thought that was like a really interesting part of the conversation too, which actually, not to sidetrack the conversation, but reminds me of the live podcast Q&A that we had, or post podcast Q&A we had with Emily from the Kitchen Think and Food Biz School. We talked a lot about focus and what do you do and how do you focus and move yourself and your business forward when you have a team in place or when you're able to delegate. And I just thought both of those conversations were super interesting and helpful, lots of aha moments. And at the core, the ability for community members to come together, know that they're not alone in the food industry and in what they're sort of going through and working through, is just really great. And as you said, it's like, it's the purpose, it's the point, it's why the community and this book club exist.
Yeah, I think that when we do come together, right? One thing that always comes up in any community event that we have is a group of people going, "Oh, I'm not alone."
Yeah.
Or I'm not the only one that's going through that or having that struggle. And I think it's just like a really powerful reminder of the impact that it has when we do come together and we share as a community.
Yeah. And our hope with the book club is that when we're all reading the same thing together, we will have both the same takeaways, but then also very different takeaways that we can share and provide perspective on and really dig into. And it's really fun, I think, to have that sort of central focal point to start a conversation around. I had a great
Yeah,
time.
I did too. It was really awesome. But Sarah, without further ado,
Yeah.
I would love for you to share with us the new title, the new selection for
Yeah.
the Good Food CFO Book Club this season.
I'm so happy to. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the book title on the video now. So it's called The Great Game of Business, and it is authored by Jack Stack with Bo Burlingham. Bo Burlingham, you might recognize that name. He's also the author of one of my favorite books and one of my, I think, most highly recommended books, which is called Small Giants. I love that book so much. And Jack is also the author of a few other books. He titled A Stake in the Outcome, Building a Culture of Ownership for the Long-Term Success of Your Business, and also Change the Game, Saving the American Dream by Closing the Gap Between the Haves and the Have-Nots. And The Great Game of Business was his first book. It was actually published the first time around in 1992. And then what I have here is the updated and re-released version from 2013.
Okay, so we know, if you're a listener of the podcast, right, who Bo Burlingham is. We, as you've talked about already, he wrote Small Giants, and you talked about that here on the podcast. I've never heard of Mr. Stack. I'd love to know a little bit more, like who is Jack Stack and why did he write this book?
Yeah. So Jack is the president and CEO of a company called SRC Holdings Corporation. It's located in Springfield, Missouri. And The Great Game of Business is actually a documentation and a storytelling of how that business was being operated. Now, it was a remanufacturing business, meaning it remanufactured truck and automobile engines. Jack refers to it as a classy garage shop. So it's not a food business. But one of the many reasons that I love this book and I'm recommending this book is because what made SRC different and why it was documented in this book is that the business wasn't run in a traditional top-down way, the way that the majority of other businesses are, right? And they practice what Jack calls open book management and found success playing what they called the great game of business. And the result of these two things was that they built a repeatable system that enabled their associates, literally every employee across the company, to essentially run the company. And in some cases, even develop ideas that branched off into independent businesses of their own underneath the SRC umbrella, which is really neat. And lastly, open book culture focuses on transparency, integrity, and business literacy, which we often call financial confidence, right? And today, SRC Holding Corp is an employee owned business. All of this got started. I mean, Jack was, I think, a manager, or like working on the floor in some capacity at SRC back in the 80s during the recession. And
Mm.
SRC at the time was actually a part of another company called International Harvester. So they were a division of International Harvester who had been going through like many rounds of layoffs. According to Jack, they were laying off like 1,000 employees a week across all of their divisions.
Goodness.
Yeah. And then with the layoffs coming to Springfield, they actually got together because there were no other job prospects, right? They're in the midst of a recession. They got together with other employees and scraped together, as he puts it, $100,000 to buy SRC. Isn't that wild? And so they were rejected. And this is an important part of the story because they were rejected from literally every single financial institution. And finally, one bank was willing to give them a loan, which Jack calls the worst loan in corporate American history. It was an $8.9 million loan with an interest rate of 18%. And they had just that $100,000 in equity, in assets. They had nothing else, right? So
Yeah.
to put this in perspective, this is a debt ratio of 89. And it's considered good if you have a debt ratio of like 1 or less, right? So it was imperative for Jack and the other folks who had scraped together that money to, you know, become the owners of this business to meet their loan payment terms. Because if they didn't repay that loan and they defaulted, the business would go away, they would lose their jobs. And that is what led to the idea of open book management because Jack didn't have the answers. He
Yeah.
didn't have all of the answers. No individual person who now had ownership in this business had the answers. And so they really felt like if we open the books and we tap into the knowledge and the skill that every individual within this company has, then I think we can be unstoppable.
What a cool story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, you've set it up now. I'm getting excited. I don't know if I've mentioned yet, but I already ordered my copy. I'm really excited to dive into it, but I would love to hear a little bit more about, why you chose this book for this season.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, it's a remanufacturing company, right? They're like rebuilding engines and things like that. It's not a food industry specific book, but a couple of things. One, right, is like one is it's a bit of an underdog story. They're starting from a place where yes, they have this loan to be able to, you know, get their operations kind of off the ground, if you will, but they have $100,000 and that's it. And that's not enough to pay that loan back and operate, right? So staying afloat meant that they had to be successful, and it wasn't going to be just about selling more, which is something that we talk about with founders
Yeah.
all of the time, right? It was about creating an efficient business, hitting the right targets that needed to be hit to be profitable, and generating enough positive cash flow to operate and pay back the loan. And that to me, even though the businesses aren't the same, food business and the SRC business, I think that is something that many businesses across industry have in common. Even if you're starting out with like capital investment, right, from others, like technically it's borrowed money. And
Yeah.
you, in order to succeed, as we've talked about a couple of times on the podcast now, and like, when we think about unicorns and stuff, having the money, having the funding, it doesn't mean you're going to be successful. And these people knew each other. They had worked with each other, prior to taking ownership of the business, and they wanted to be successful for one another. I know that in the hearts of food founders, and lots of folks across the industry, employing people long term and paying them a fair wage matters. Paying themselves matters, right? And staying in business a long time to fulfill their mission matters. And this book shares strategies for doing that and for doing business differently, which
Yeah.
very much aligns with what we do here and what we want to support.
The title of this book is so intriguing to me, The Great Game of Business. Why did they choose that wording? Like, why game?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned earlier, this is the re-released version of the book, and in the intro, he talks a little bit about the use of the word game and kind of how some people felt about it. Some people thought it diminished the seriousness of business by calling it a game. But I love what he writes. I'm going to read what he wrote here. He says, "Business is not an art or a science. It's a competitive undertaking with rules, winners and losers, ways of keeping score, and all of the elements of luck and talent. It doesn't have to be an instrument of exploitation or a tool of greed, and you don't need an MBA to understand it." So using the word game was not to trivialize business in his mind, nor the importance of the success of business to people's lives, which he takes very seriously. But the use of the word game was to make it approachable and less intimidating to those folks who in this specific case were working on the shop floor or in an office but never led a business before, right? And never had to deal with financial statements, and who had never been brought into the fold, if you will, in the way that they wanted to bring these folks into the fold at SRC. So he really felt like making it a game, as I said before, makes it approachable. And I also think that it leads to camaraderie and also accountability within the business when everyone knows that they're working together to reach a goal and everyone knows what is needed to be successful at the game. And personally, like one other note is, I think of business a lot as at least in the financial sense, as like a math problem, right? And definitely could be gamified in a way, right? When you're
Mm,
like, okay, I'm looking at the formula and this is the piece that's making it not work. So let's now see what we can do to change that piece, right? And it can become a game. And you can't change a business from the top alone. You need everyone on the team to be participating. So that's the origin of the use of the word game. It's literally what they called it at SRC. And this is a documentation of what they did. And so that's then, of course, the title of the book.
That's amazing. Can you give us a little maybe preview to some of the ideas or concepts that we're going to read in this book?
Yeah. So I think one of the big things that I want to share here, and again, one of the many reasons I've chosen this book as the second title, is that, Jack and Bo both really believe that anyone can be taught to be a business person or a leader. So if there's a founder out there who is like, I've never led a team before, or, I've never manufactured a product before, or I'm not totally sure how to do this, it's okay, right? And much like our goal here, Jack created the great game of business as a way to help his associates, and in our case, to help founders build confidence in becoming business people, right? By creating and running what he calls a repeatable system. And he built that system on three principles. And I want to share those three principles with you. The first one is know the rules. So every employee should be given the measures of business success and taught to understand them. The second is follow the action and keep score. So every employee should be expected and enabled to act on his or her knowledge to improve performance. And number three, provide stake in the outcome. Every employee should have a direct stake in the company's success and risk of failure.
You're making me very excited to read this book. Like so many of the things that you've already talked about just in describing it and kind of setting it up is reminding me of the core experience of being on a team.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Right? My experience, not just in my career, but even through sports and music and theater, like all
Yeah.
of the things that I've done and loved have been in a team environment. And, even at Starbucks, right? Getting to lead a team in a store, all of what you just said, the providing stake in the outcome. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
all the conversations that we had with partners and team members, what really was about finding like what is their stake?
Yeah.
What is their why? Why do they show up every day, right? And
Mm.
and getting that ownership and then walking them through those steps of how do you achieve that then? How do we measure that? And what are the systems that we're going to use to achieve all of these things that you want? So
Right. Yeah.
it's just making me really excited.
When you talk about like sports and theater, anything where it's a group of people, right? More
Hmm.
than one person working to achieve something. When I think about that sort of top down leadership, I played basketball in high school. And so, yeah, you could have one great player, let's say, or one person who kind of ran the show, but you would limit your success in that way, right? You What made you most successful, and actually the Michael Jordan documentary, I don't know if you watched that. I think it came out
Hmm.
a couple of years ago. There's a section of that documentary. Michael Jordan is Michael Jordan, right? But he was on a losing Bulls team. And part of the reason why was because he didn't have a good leader. He didn't have a good coach, right? And when
Hmm.
when I think it was his name Phil
Hmm.
came in, I believe he told Michael Jordan, like, yeah, you are the best player on the team, but you need to be a team player,
Yeah.
right? We need to work as a team. And when that clicked and when that started to happen, then the Bulls became the Bulls that we know, right?
Yeah.
And all of the accolades that they've achieved. And I think about that in terms of a business as well. Like, in two ways. You could be the leader who has all the information and who has all the answers, and you're trying to force your team to do the work, right? That's going to be a hard road. You could also be a leader who doesn't have all of the answers,
Yeah.
right? but you feel like you should. And so you're just keeping things to yourself and trying to do the best you can and not let on that maybe some input from the team and some of their knowledge sharing could benefit you, right? So like I don't think there's a single example of how providing stake in the outcome could turn out bad. I think there's only positive that can come from that.
And, you're talking about sports, and it's actually taking me to a little insight about me. I love watching any kind of like documentary series or shows. And I have been obsessed with Coach Prime. We've talked about it before,
Mm-hmm.
but I was just catching up on this last season, which was his first season at Colorado.
Yeah.
And something that I thought was so fascinating as I watched it was when we talk about providing a stake in the outcome and then also the follow the action and keep score. Something that really struck me was like, it's yes, Deion Sanders is the coach and he provides guidance and but
Yeah.
his entire coaching staff, right, has
Mm-hmm.
ownership in their position coaching.
Yeah.
He tries to inspire ownership in the players,
Mm-hmm.
the athletic trainers, and but all the way down to the like sports department, or I don't know if it was the sports department or like the football team chef.
Yeah.
Like there's a whole part
Mm-hmm.
of the episode where the chef is talking about the changes that he's made to the menu, the things that he's cooking and providing to them, because he knows that what he's doing impacts the way those players go out and play,
That is such a great example.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And from the initial thought of like, oh, I cook for a college or a college football team, right? That you could just be like, yeah, I do that. And, we give them food that kids like. Or you can
Mhm.
think about it like, I play an imperative role, like in the success of this football team, because I am literally preparing the fuel,
Yeah.
right, for their bodies to go and do the work day in and day out. And it's such a great example. And again, I read this book a couple of years ago, and so it's not totally fresh in my mind. I'm excited to reread it again. But I remember vaguely part of the book where Jack talks about someone in the inventory department who was responsible for making sure that the parts are there when the the guys on the floor need them, and how that person didn't know because he was never informed
Mm.
about how important his role is, and if they don't have the piece when it's needed, what that trickles to. And it's not a trickle, it's an unhappy customer at the end of the day, it's a loss of money, it's downtime on the floor, right? It's a critical component. But in their mind, they just felt like the guy who's in the room with all the things, and he just picks the inventory that's needed and puts it there. And if they don't have it, he'll order it. And
Mm.
I think that it's very easy for anyone to feel that way on the team if they're not told how important they are. Every job exists because it's important to the success of the team.
You're bringing up such a good point, and it's making me curious, like, and you don't need to go into like full detail because we're going to
Yeah.
read the book,
Yeah.
but I'm curious to know if, because in this story, right, you're talking about a group of people who are running a company, like they have actual ownership,
Yeah.
right, in the company. From the perspective of a founder or a CEO of a food business, does the book provide insight around how you can provide those stakes, or share that with your team if you're not employee owned?
Yeah, it does. It does. And I should say I don't remember if every single person within the company had ownership. I think those that were able, and however they were able to bring that $100,000 together,
Mm.
there was some like ownership, but if my memory served me correctly, not everyone had an ownership stake in the business at the very beginning. And
Okay.
he does talk about in the book ways that you can create stakes, right? So an example that I'll just share here, and there are others in the book, is if we're profitable, right? And not just like a little bit profitable, but if we hit this certain profit target, then that means there's additional money that can be paid out to employees as a bonus.
Mm.
And something that I love about this book, I keep saying that, something I love about this book, so many things, but it's called a game. They're not competing against each other at any point in time.
Yeah.
Everyone on the company is on the same team. So I think it's common, right, for businesses to have a sales team and motivate that sales team with, commission and
Mhm.
bonuses. But the people supporting that sales department, producing the product, getting the work done, they're not given a commission or a bonus structure, right? And it changes in the great game of business where no one's getting a bonus unless everyone's getting a bonus.
Yeah.
And you're not pitting, this department against that department and who can produce more this week. No, it's how do we ensure that everybody is rising up and every department is capable and able. So if you have, engine remanufacturing over here and you've got another kind of remanufacturing over here, it's not a contest to see who can, get more engines out the door or something like that, right? And I love that. So to answer your question though, yes, he does provide ways to create that stake in the game for employees. And I can highlight a couple other like parts of the book without
Yeah.
giving it all away, just I think to give folks who are listening kind of a good sense of what's included here. I mean, it's not a small book. It's a fatty, right? But I will say this, the font is pretty big and so are the margins.
Oh, nice.
So it's not too bad. And it's
Yeah.
also really interesting and totally worth it. So one of the things he talks about first is he calls it the big picture, right? What is the big picture? What is the vision? What are we striving
Mm.
for? And not just what is it, but how do you communicate it to your team? How do you help them to understand what the big picture is and what you're trying to accomplish? And he, as he does throughout the book, he makes some suggestions, right? I remember at one point as I was kind of flipping through it to prep for this episode, he says, don't just tell them what the big picture is, draw them a picture, tell them what the end looks like, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and what that stake is and what you're really trying to build and really get people excited about it and help them
Mm.
see it. Don't just tell them. And I think that that's something that, again, if you haven't been taught leadership, it's not something that comes natural to everyone. And so there's a lot of insights into leadership in this book as well that I think everybody can learn something from. He, of course, talks about open book management. And what I want to highlight here very specifically, because I want people to be assured of this is not a book that teaches you how to read financial reports or challenges you to teach your team how to analyze financials. And I love that he actually says that you aren't going to be sharing the kind of financials that a CPA uses
Mm.
via open book management. Those are for outside people, right? Investors, bankers, the IRS. Instead, you need to break down your financial data into a way that sheds light on what is happening inside the company so that each person can see how his or her role affects the income statement, right? The profitability, the balance sheet, right? The
Mhm.
things that keep the business going, paying the bills and paying the team those bonuses perhaps that we just talked about, right? And I can't help but think when I hear that, this is our profit assessment. We have a tool that takes your financial reports and breaks them down into a one pager. I think there's like 12 lines on it, right? Where you can see what do these numbers mean for my business? What is happening in the business? And so it excites me that, you don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to develop your own tools. You don't have to figure it out on your own. You can come and do the profit assessment course and have those numbers and then communicate to your team. This is what this means and this is what we need to change. And we actually did this in office hours this week.
Mm.
One of the members did a profit assessment, identified two things. One, that her labor costs were more per unit in reality than what she had projected, which is very common right? So like on paper, when you're saying this is how much it costs to produce like a unit of my product, the labor might make up 15%. But in reality, labor was 28% of revenue,
Mm.
right? And so that's like a huge learning for her. And so she was able to say, oh, these numbers on the P&L, which I never gained this insight from, when translated onto the profit assessment, showed me that my labor costs are higher than I believed that they would be. And now I know that I need to investigate how efficient are we? Does my team need better equipment? Do they need more resources? Do they need training? Is there a hindrance, right? So it's like this very clear action. And she also has the ability now to say, hey guys, this is affecting our
Yeah.
profitability and our ability to, pay bonuses or give you increases in wages, right? And so let's talk about how we can create change so that this labor percentage drops per unit and we're able to produce more, we're able to sell more, right? And show them, right, going back to that big picture, show them what
Mhm.
it means to be able to change that labor number.
This is where you're 100% selling me on this book, because we've talked about the profit assessment a bunch of
So many
times,
times.
right?
Yeah.
And I always talk about the thing that excites me about it is that it can show you, right, the specific areas in your business to focus on. But you just blew my mind open when you said, oh, and by the way, you can also use it as a coaching tool.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's why we talk about it so much, right? And also
Yeah.
because I know, listen, when I look at a P&L, there are certain things I can pick up on, right? I'll do the math on a couple of things, but I need it to go through the profit assessment for me to have that full understanding. The profit assessment was created for me to be able to do my job as a CFO well. And then when I got used to it and used it enough times where I felt comfortable teaching other people how to utilize it, that's when we released it as a course. And we talk about
Mm-hmm.
it so much because it's so valuable in so many ways. And I'm talking about it in the context of this book club because it is a tool that can help you to implement the really awesome things that Jack Stack and Bo Burlingham are talking about throughout the book.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so the other thing he then talks about, right, is like, okay, you've got this big picture. Now you've got a way to understand your financials and communicate them to your team. Now, what is the game that we're creating? So he talks through in the book, creating the game and also setting the right goals, right, for the game. And then how do you get the buy-in from your team? So this is not a book where he's saying, here are the things you need to do or that you should do, and then just sort of leaving you alone to implement it. Again, he's got a different kind of a manufacturing company, and not every food founder is going to have a business that mirrors sort of the operations of a manufacturing company, but there are takeaways for our business, right? As a service-based business, for food founders, really for any kind of business out there. There's so much in this book. Again, I cannot wait to dig back into it and really take some good notes and to come to the book club event and dig into it with people. I'm really jazzed to read it again.
You got me hyped. I'm excited.
Good.
I'm glad it's in the mail.
Good.
I can't wait to dig in. So if you're listening to this episode and you want to read along with us and then join us for our live discussion, you can purchase The Great Game of Business from our bookshop. All you have to do is visit thegoodfoodcfo.com and click on bookshop. We'll also include the link to purchase in our show notes. And just remember that anytime you purchase a book from our Good Food CFO bookshop, you are supporting the podcast and you're also supporting independent bookstores across the country. It's a really great way to show your love. And we hope that you join us to discuss The Great Game of Business when we get together on Tuesday, March 5th inside the community. If you want to get details on that event and any updates that we might have, make sure you're on our mailing list and you'll get all the information.
All right, Chels, let's get reading.
To get all the information and stay up to date on our Good Food CFO book club, make sure you're signed up for our newsletter. Just visit thegoodfoodcfo.com to join.
Thank you for joining us here today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or inspiring in any way, please share it with your founder friends on social and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the #1 way to help good food founders find the show. We'll be back with a brand new episode next week.